Hi, my name is Donald Flower, and I'm an enrolled member of the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians. I grew up in Anoka, Minnesota, and I graduated from Anoka High School. I'm an Anoka Tornado. So I went on to attend Augsburg College, and I finished a degree there in history, and then I would eventually go on to complete several IT certifications, and I also have a Master's of Business Administration from American Military University. Most of my career has been completely in technology. For the last 25 years, I've worked in IT, and I enjoy doing that, and I really like helping people to make their lives easier. I'm currently the Information Technology Director at a private equity firm in Minneapolis, and I've been there for some time. Before that, I have several years in the nonprofit world, working for Opportunity Partners and working at the Minneapolis Foundation, all supporting their IT infrastructure. For 18 years, I've also worked in the Navy. So I'm a Navy reservist. I'm an information warfare officer, and I've served my time not only in the reserves, but I've also served active duty time as well. I'm currently a board member at American Indian OIC in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I've been serving there for about 5 years. And before that, I served on the board of Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center for about 8 years. As far as my career goes, I would have to say in information technology, that is not something I originally planned to do. So I completely fell into it. The truth is, back in the 90s, that's when there was a lot of IT build out, and there were a lot of opportunities there, and I was starting out my career, and I decided to help out some individuals that needed some IT support, and the rest is history. They asked me to stay on and continue working with them. It was a medical device manufacturer, and that's how I started my career. I completely fell into it, and I got retrained, and I've been training ever since to keep up with my skills in IT. As far as being on a board, that's something I've always wanted to do. Volunteering and serving in the community is something that's very important to me. It's a big part of my life, and I get a great deal of pleasure doing that.
Did you always see yourself serving in the military?
As far as the military goes, I joined after 9/11, so I always wanted to go in the military, but I felt a calling after the 9/11 attacks, and I decided to go into the Navy after that as a reservist. So that took a lot of time away from my family and my own personal time, but it's something I felt an enormous commitment to do. First of all, I'd just like to start out by saying not everything Native related is a challenge. There's a lot of good things that Native people do, and a lot of very positive things going on out there. But despite that, there's a lot of challenges. So I just want to start by talking a lot about blood quantum. So blood quantum is a serious issue, and what it really does is it serves to alienate a certain part of the Native American culture, because you're defined by how much Indian you are. And sometimes it can be very difficult to determine how much Indian or Native, if you will, that a person really is. So for instance, there are certain situations where if a person's relatives are from two different reservations and they have children, sometimes that Native blood is not recognized by the other tribe or the other band. It's split between the two reservations. Even though that person may be a full-blooded Native or full-blooded Indian, they may only be recognized as a half on certain reservations. And that just serves to diminish people's blood quantum, and it's a very difficult thing to determine. Other people, they just lose traces of that. They look back, they know they're Native, they look back, but it's hard to find in the records where they lost their blood quantum, and so it can be a very difficult thing. So it should really be up to the tribes who identify people as Native, and it should be up to them to say who is and who isn't, and it shouldn't be the federal government. Another issue is low graduation rates. So one of the things that we do at American Indian OIC is we help to provide an alternative high school at that particular center. So unfortunately, Native American students do struggle with graduation. They have some of the lowest graduations in our state. and actually throughout the country. And that's something that needs to be addressed, because there's something going on with, a mixture of a lot of things. But, I think we have to really ask ourselves why Native people are not succeeding in public high schools. I think there's a real issue there that needs to be addressed, and we have to have alternate methods for them to help with graduation. Another issue that I see is homelessness. When I served on the board of Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center, one of the many things that we did over there was address homelessness, and it was an emergency shelter for several families. And it's something that is ongoing, and it's getting worse, and it's definitely something people need to pay attention to. Human trafficking on reservations is also a very significant problem. Human trafficking on Indian reservations is very high, and a lot of people are not aware of this, and that awareness needs to continue to get out there so we can try to address this and try to save our people. As most of you know, addiction is also a serious problem with Native people, especially around alcoholism. And I think that making sure that not only when people are growing up that we give them the right resources and the right mentoring to avoid these types of things, we also have to include certain programs to help people that have addiction and want to get through that. You can succeed in life if you get help, and we need to be able to provide that help for our people. And then finally, healthcare. As many of you have probably seen in the news, with COVID, we have very high COVID rates, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and I think those issues have to be addressed. So there just seems to be a lot of inequity in that area, and we need to make sure we're taking care of Native people and making sure they're staying safe, even in the most remote regions of our country. And then finally, diabetes. So diabetes is a very common thing in the Native community, and something that we have to address. That can take place in a lot of different forms. Number one, making sure that we let people know that taking care of yourself, keeping your weight down, eating the right kind of foods, and eating healthy foods is very important. That can be an enormous challenge when Native people come from sometimes poverty areas where they don't have access to good food, and they don't have good access to those type of education that can show you how to eat right. And then I would say the second thing is to also just make sure that people have access to making sure that they can manage their diabetes through local health centers.
Can you speak of some successes or success stories you think about in the Native community, or some of your Native role models, and how have you found success as a Native person?
I think the person that comes to mind right away is my cousin Sam English out in New Mexico. He's done great work in the community. He's done so much to help Native people through things like addiction, through things like healthcare. He's a great artist, very good at watercolors, one of the best I've seen. I just love his work. And then the other thing about Sam, he's an activist. He's done so much to help Native people around equity issues, and I'm just very proud to have him as part of my family. I love athletics, so the person that comes to mind for athletics is Jim Thorpe. I just think he did such great things during his time here on Earth, and he played professional football. He was in the Olympics. I believe he won the decathlon and the pentathlon. Just one of the greatest athletes of all time, and just proud to see him as a Native person. Peggy Flanagan, also our Lieutenant Governor. I've had the opportunity to hear her speak, and she's a great advocate for people of color in the state of Minnesota, and so glad that she's serving. And more recently, Deb Haaland is in the new administration as Secretary of the Interior, and just a great pickup for the administration. I think she's going to be very helpful there. Personally, for my own personal success story, I just start off with my family. Raising a family is hard, okay? And so I've been married for 30 years, and I've raised 3 children, and they've all finished college. And I made sure that they were exposed while they were going to school to taking Native classes and learning about their culture and things like that. And they're just doing great. So I think that's probably one of my biggest success stories that I have. Being a parent's not so easy, and just very proud of my kids. I've already mentioned my career. I've had about 25 years in IT, both in the Navy and in the civilian world. And it's been a great job for me. And I hope to continue on with that all until I retire.
How have you kept your Native culture and community close to your heart in your life?
So the way that I stay involved is, I just lean towards advocacy and supporting organizations. So my board work is really the best way with my skill set on how I can support Native people. So I'm really more of an advocate than an activist, if you will, and it's just where my skill sets are.
What advice do you give to Native students about how they could stay connected to their culture?
I think that's super important. I mean, there's a lot of people that just don't grow up either on the reservation or they don't grow up like right next to a Native community, for instance. So one thing that kids can do is I always advise them to see their Indian Ed advisor. You should be attending powwows. I mean, even in the suburbs where I live, we have local powwows and things like that. And you need to be engaged in these things. These are very important. And anytime you have an opportunity, I also think that you should be listening to your elders, taking time for that, because in our community, we really believe in the wisdom of elders and taking time for them and having respect for your elders. That is very critical to our success. So I would always encourage that. Now, for people that already live in the community, I understand that you may know about these things, but we've been very detached in certain ways as Native people. So I'm just trying to give some advice to people who may not have grown up in a traditional background.
What challenges have you had to overcome, and how did you overcome them to get where you are today?
Well, like anybody else, I've had a lot of challenges in my life, I think, but one of the toughest ones was being a young parent. So I was a parent at 20 years old, and that's not so easy when you're not done with college and you have a long road ahead of you to get through that, to be able to take care of your family. So I would think that was one in my life. That's one of the biggest challenges that I've had. In order to overcome that, it takes a lot of planning. It takes things like dedication to education. I just knew that my path to move forward was to make sure I was educated. My family was a huge motivator to me, and I think absolute persistence and perseverance is just something that really paid off for me. When I make a commitment to something, I follow through with it, and I would recommend that to any young person. So make a good plan and stick to it and get through it. I think the other thing too is, being a part of something that is larger than myself was also a huge motivating factor for me personally. So my military service, working on boards, things like that, working on my career, being a part of something significant really matters to me. And I think it would matter to young people as well.
How has being Native American influenced your life and your experience as a young person and as an adult?
Well, as a young person, what I remember people telling me to be proud of being Native. I was mixed race. My mother's white, my dad's Native, and we didn't really know a lot about our culture, to be honest with you. I grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis. I lived in neighborhoods that were predominantly white, and I don't recall having a lot of access to Indian education, or people weren't telling me about it. And I had a hard time with that growing up. I didn't really understand what that meant to be proud of what I was, because I didn't know a lot of my relatives. And when I did experience my relatives, some of them were great and some of them were challenging, and so I wasn't sure what to think. So I had to work through that. And, when people learned that I was Native, especially in my community, it wasn't a very positive thing. I was exposed to name calling. I got in a lot of fights over it. And it was very frustrating for me when I was younger, understanding that part of who I was. You're kind of walking in two worlds, if you will. But when I got older, I just got lucky. And I wanted to learn more about my nativeness. And I ran into my cousin, Sam English. And he was willing to teach me and tell me that I was Native and that I was accepted in the family as a Native person. And he really changed my perceptions of how I viewed not only Native people, but my Native family, because he was successful. He told me about other people that were successful and told me all the great things that come from being Native. So that's part of my experience. And then I took that to the next level. And when I specifically chose Augsburg College because they had an American Indian Studies program that I minored in there. I learned about Native history while I was there, and it really opened my eyes to what was happening to Native American people. Not long after that, during my time working at Minneapolis Foundation, I was invited to work on the board at MIWRC, Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center. I really enjoyed helping out there. They needed me a lot for not only IT work, but also to help guide the organization. I just learned so much about the needs of Native people while I was there, and I learned all the good things about Native people while I was there too. Right down the road from there, as I mentioned earlier, I'm also on the board of American Indian OIC. I'm very proud to work on that board as well and help Native people with alternative education and vocational, technical education to help them get good paying jobs. So I have transitioned from a person as a child not knowing a whole lot about my community and now being deeply involved in the community in Minneapolis and also being enrolled at Red Lake Indian Reservation, which I'm extremely proud of. So, my world has changed. A lot of that has had to do with meeting the right people that could tell me a little bit about my background, but also being proactive. And I guess I would really encourage people to take time, if they're Native, to learn more about their culture if they don't grow up in those environments. Reach out to people, learn more about it, and be proud of who you are. What does Native mean to me? Well, being a Native American, especially with my tribe, I feel like I'm a part of a culture, which is very important to me. I was 50 years old when I got enrolled at Red Lake, and I can tell you I feel like I really belong, and that matters to me. It also matters to me to know that I'm a part of a culture, that we're the original inhabitants of this country, and we're still here, and we're proud, and we're not going anywhere.
I know your military service has been very important in your life.
Yes.
Let's talk about that and other Native people who serve.
Well, Native Americans, they have a rich history serving in the military in the United States. So, even before the Europeans came here, Native Americans had a rich warrior culture, and to this day they still do. And, per capita, more Native Americans serve than any other race in our country. They have a call to service like no other, and I'm very proud of that. They really want to keep that tradition going. Again, they've served since the founding of our country. Some examples I can think of is, during the Civil War, they served in the Civil War. As a matter of fact, there was a Native American at Appomattox Courthouse during the surrender. More recently, they've made movies about the Code Talkers in World War II, and without them, achieving victory in the Pacific Theater in World War II would have been very difficult. So these people were recruited by the United States military because in their language, no one else knew it except for them. And so they were able to have secret codes when they were out in the field in the Pacific Theater, where they would talk to other people in different locations, and the enemy could not crack that code because no one knew their native language. And so that was a key part of achieving success, because the enemy would hear and pick up our signals from the Native Americans, but they didn't know what they were saying, and that was very beneficial to us. So I would encourage anybody to watch that movie or read about that to learn about how critical a role the Natives played. I think about our family. Our family has served as well. Like, my father served in Vietnam, and he was in Da Nang in 1968 on active duty. He was also a reservist for a significant amount of time, and I'm still currently serving. I have 18 years in the Navy Reserve. I've had active duty time, and I'm still serving as an information warfare officer. I'm very proud of that, and our family is very proud of our military service.
What challenges has your family faced overall? And then specifically, how has being Native American affected these challenges in an effort to achieve success?
Well, one of the things I do when I think about family is I always try to look at the generation before. So I think about my father. So my father is Native, and he told me all the things that he had to overcome with poverty and with racism and all the challenges that came with that. And so I think, number one, if you think about how hard it is to overcome poverty, there's so many factors. It's your work ethic, it's perseverance, it's education. And if you're exposed to things like racism and things like that, it makes it twice as hard. If you don't have good support systems, it also makes it twice as hard. And so, to be honest with you, he really had to make it on his own. And his conduit to making it out of that was the military. So the military was able to give him a trade. They were able to give him a vocational skill as an aircraft mechanic, and my father was able to slowly pull himself up out of a very difficult situation, and he was able to make a nice living. All right, and combined with my mother, of course, she did her part, but she also came from a background that was also disadvantaged, and so my parents continuously, especially my dad, had to work 2 jobs all the time, sometimes 3 jobs to support his family. That work ethic, that can kind of pay off. Your children watch all those types of things. So I guess what I'm saying is it takes a lot. If you come from that, sometimes you have to work twice as hard to get out of that, to get yourself into a better life. And then of course I picked up on a lot of that myself. So thanks to my parents, I was able to grow up in a middle class family. But no one in my family had graduated from college, so I had to find the way through that, and I had to work really hard. I had to work my way through college to get through Augsburg, which was not cheap. Augsburg's an expensive school, like most, and then ultimately I had to work my way through my master's degree as well, and I worked on my master's degree when I was on active duty in the military. They helped me to pay for that, but in my downtime I started work on that, and I finished it when I got off of active duty. So, in order for you to overcome things like, poverty or racism, it takes a family effort. It takes a lot of perseverance. It takes planning, and it's something that has to really be ingrained in the family. It has to be part of the mesh and the patchwork for how your family thinks. It has to come from guidance, and it takes a commitment to get through these things, because when you start out with nothing, like my dad did, my mom did, it really takes a lot, and that's just what the truth is. And a lot of people don't want to talk about how hard that is. A lot of times you'll hear people go, oh, if anybody wants to do it, they just go do it. Or if you work hard enough and you try hard enough, you can go do it. Well, yes, that's partly true. But the truth and fact of the matter is, when you start off with disadvantage, like a lot of Native people do, not all, but like a lot of them do, it's twice as hard. And it's up to us to help each other out. It's up to the leaders in our community to rise up and help walk alongside people and open doors. That's a part of what we need to do to make sure Native people are going to be successful. And I would ask all elders, all people that have any skills, to help mentor young people to help us overcome some of the chronic poverty that we see in our community. If we're going to be successful, we have to do this together, and we need to commit to this together.
How have you been able to take care of yourself personally, your well-being, and your health during this difficult time of COVID-19?
Well, I think like a lot of other people, just diet and exercise is really important, right? So when you're working from home, you have to be really careful, making sure you're not having too many snacks and things like that. So I have really tried to get good food in the house. The other thing is, when you have a little bit more time at home, because you're not having your commute every day, been able to take long walks and making sure I'm exercising. I think mentally that really helps you. And the other thing too is I've really tried to stay engaged with my family. Making sure that support structure is still there, making sure I'm talking to my friends and coworkers on a routine basis. I think that communication actually helps your overall well-being.
Yeah.